Polypede works here. So, in One Piece episode 1104, we see that Stussy is all the offensive and she has the power of infrared vision. Now, I did a little bit of research and I found out that there's an actual bat in the real world that's a actual animal that has infrared vision in a bit of a roundabout way. The real life vampire bat does have the ability to sense in infrared through some weird nerves on its funny nose. These nerves help it to prey on warm-blooded creatures. Because as you know, vampire bats sort of scrape and lick blood from these warm-blooded creatures and they sap up the blood. So, with that being said, I think Stussy is actually a vampire bat Zoan. I don't think she's a normal Zoan, however. I think her fruit powers stem from an artificial dough fruit. And I guess she's kind of doing a victory lap for how many things you can put on her resume, because not only is she the first successful human clone in history, I think she's the first successful artificial dough fruit user in history. Because in the Mads cover story, we see Caesar Clown holding a weird dough fruit. However, this dough fruit does not look like a regular run-of-the-mill dough fruit, nor does it actually look like an artificial dough fruit as we know them now. No, it's a combination of the two, because a normal dough fruit usually has a curly stem, right? This dough fruit does have a curly stem, something that we have not seen from any other artificial dough fruit, whether that be Momonosuke's or the production line ones that the Totara were cultivating for Kaido, right? But what this does have in common with artificial dough fruits is that it has these sort of open circles all over its body, much like Momonosuke's dough fruit and then the production line dough fruits. So, what further gives credence to Stussy being the user of this supposed artificial vampire bat Zoan fruit is that in chapter 1072, in the Mads cover story, when the dough fruit is shown off, we also see on the first page Vegapunk telling us that he has created the first clone in human history. That clone is Stussy. So it's very peculiar that the dough fruit and the announcement of Stussy's nature are happening in the same chapter. But continuing on about the dough fruit, this is a very interesting object because it's the only one of its kind that we have seen in the series so far that has traits of both a normal dough fruit and an artificial dough fruit. The reason why, too, this doesn't get included in sort of like the fold of the dough fruit families is because artificial dough fruits, we find out, are actually cultivated from the lineage factors of normal animals. That's why you don't see anything too obtuse in a lot of the artificial dough fruits of, say, Kaido's army. The reason why, too, Momonosuke's dough fruit exists is because of the experiments done on the user of the original fish fruit model Azure Dragon, Kaido. So Momonosuke is the only dough fruit user who has a artificial dough fruit based off a mythical Zoan, whereas I think Stussy is the first artificial dough fruit user, bar none, just based on how unique and odd her supposed dough fruit is, which of course is the dough fruit that Caesar Clown is holding in the Mads cover story. On top of that, I know a lot of people might think that she is a vampire, which is a very funny coincidence that I just want to bring up because this has happened before, this sort of mythical real world animal comparison type thing, because in the video game One Piece Unlimited World Red for the 3DS, we have a character who is the main antagonist of that game called Patrick Redfield. Patrick Redfield has the ability of the bad fruit model vampire, but it's a mythical Zoan fruit, And it's kind of like your standard movie monster. At least that's what it's trying to portray. Like he's an actual vampire, even though he's still like a weird bat creature when he transforms. And we actually get to see the devil fruit. And no, it looks nothing like the artificial devil fruit I was talking about. But it's interesting because also in that video game, he has a minion who defects called Pato. Pato is a pen that has eaten the dog fruit model Bakai Danuki, which is just a yokai that's a tanuki, a yokai raccoon dog. The reason why this ties back to Stussy is because Stussy is a canon character who has vampire bat powers. Patrick Redfield is a non-canon character who has vampire bat powers in an off-brand way, even though his powers are mythical. But Pato, even though he's a pen that has eaten a tanuki fruit, we then, in the manga, have another character who is an object, in this case a teapot, who has eaten a very similar fruit. But much like with Stussy, this character, whose name is Banbuku, is a character who has eaten the real-life version of the mythical creature. He just has a normal tanuki fruit. It's called the dog fruit model tanuki. So I just found that very interesting that in both cases we have two canon characters who have the real life animal variant of the devil fruit, and then we have the video game characters who are in basically the same situations with a pen eating the mythical version of the tanuki fruit, and then we have a guy eating the mythical version of the bat fruit. I just wanted to point that out because I thought it was very interesting. Now, on top of that, I think based on what goes on in Egghead, because in Kuma's flashback, we see that he does become a warlord, but he becomes a warlord through Saturn's arrangements, not through getting a messenger bat who sends him the invitation, which most likely means that based on the time this is set in, we see that Stussy is fairly young and hasn't really come into her own yet as a clone. So most likely she hasn't started doing her government espionage work yet. So it's likely that Stussy is actually the messenger bat that gives all the warlords their invitations, because we find out when Jinbei gets his invitation and when Buggy gets his invitation, they are both delivered by what seems to be a vampire bat, because as you may or may not know, vampire bats have like a weird pig-like nose. That same nose that gives the bat the quote-unquote infrared vision. Yeah, those noses look like that of a pig's nose. And from what we've seen of the messenger bat, it has a pig's nose. So most likely that is a vampire bat. And that vampire bat, I think, is Stussy. You can even see too, it has sharp teeth. Even though they do have sharp teeth, that's sort of just like a cartoon stylization thing, but it's still important. And in an odd way, it would make sense for a vampire bat to be a messenger to a warlord, because if you think about it, and you think about the world of One Piece, it would be very easy for a bat, especially if this bat is Stussy, to pick up on people because it can see in infrared. So if a person is on a boat or in the jungle, whatever, they can most likely pick up on their heat signature and their silhouette using their infrared vision if this bat is Stussy and she's using what she does in the anime to actually see whom her target is. It makes a ton of sense. It also allows her to most likely blend in into locations, because a bat in itself is just kind of a mundane animal. So for espionage work, it makes a lot of sense as well. However, getting back to the Kuma flashback, we don't know how old Stussy is yet, but seeing as how she's coming to terms with herself being a clone of somebody else, it's fair to say that she's still fairly young, which most likely means, given that Saturn gives Kuma his warlord invitation and not a bat, so most likely that means she hasn't become the messenger bat for the warlord system just yet. So that's why I'm saying that this kind of ties in well together, because we've only seen Warlord invitations be given out in the current timeline after the fact of which she's created and she's like a full working agent. So that sort of strengthens the idea that she is indeed the messenger bat that gives out the Warlord invitations. What's also very funny about this thought of Stussy being the invitational bat for Warlords is that, as you know, Stussy is a clone of Miss Bucking. Miss Bucking's supposed son, Edward Weevil, became a warlord. So, in a way, she got to see her little brother, apparently, when she gave him the warlord invitation, if all this is to be believed. I guess that would be her little brother, I'm not sure, or her nephew, I guess. I don't know how clone genealogy works in that way. What's also kind of interesting, but I don't know if this is real or not, but in the flashback for Orochi back in Wano, we see that the Kurozumi grandmother, who had the clone fruit at the time, turned into both Shiki and a blonde woman. This blonde woman could have been the original Stussy. And this is a little extra theory for you, but what if Miss Bucking's actually the mother of Yamato? Because it's super weird that she would turn into two people who bear some resemblance to folks that were on the Rocks crew, that being a very young Shiki and supposedly a very young Miss Bucking. What's also very interesting is that she seemed to be more worldly than your average Wano inhabitant, because she knew what dove fruits were, because she presented Orochi with the Yamato no Orochi fruit, and she does have a very sort of close relationship with Kaido and was responsible for his victory over Odin. So all I'm saying is that she could have been on the Rocks crew with Kaido and just decided to roll with Kaido. Just saying. It also makes sense that Kaido would have the Yamato no Orochi fruit in his possession, as he did have a tendency for tracking down mythical and ancient Zoans, and he had a bunch. He's the reason why Ulti has her fruit, the reason why Page 1 has his fruit, and the reason why Yamato has her fruit. So I could see it. Makes a lot of sense. I just find that a very interesting thought. The only caveat I have to say is that the person that the clone fruit user turns into is a blonde woman with green eyes, and Stussy has been depicted with blue eyes, but we have not seen the eye color of Miss Bucking yet. So her eye color might be different than Stussy's, seeing as how she wears glasses all the time now. So we don't actually know what the color of her eyes actually is. So that's something kind of interesting to think about. So yeah, in short, I do think that Stussy was the Warlord messenger bat, and she does have the artificial dove fruit that Caesar created. With that being said, give me your thoughts.